What's up, everybody? It's Joe with J Blake Photo. I got a lot of questions after my last video where I talked about using LUTs in LumaFusion, editing on the iPad. And so, I mean, a lot of questions, specifically about LUTs and how to use them and where to find them and color correction and color grading. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So let's talk about color grading, color correction, LUTs, where to find them, how to use them, all of that. This is going to be a big video. Okay, so some of the stuff that I'm going to cover in this video might be similar to what I did in my last video. So I apologize if it sounds like I'm going over the same stuff again. But like I said, I had a lot of people asking questions about using LUTs and using color correction on the iPad. And so I wanted to start by just talking about some of the specifics, getting into the basics of color correction, just to cover it top down. That's why this is going to be a longer video. So if you don't mind listening to me talk for a couple of minutes about something that I think is pretty cool, then you're in the right place. If that's not what you're looking for, there's lots of videos of drone footage and stuff, so click on those. So the first thing that I want to go over is what is a color correction versus what is color grading. So the first thing that you do when you import your footage, after you've kind of cut it and you know generally what you're going to do from a story perspective, you want to get into the color correction process. So color correction has a couple of steps. What it lets you do is take things like your highlights and your lowlights and your midtones and set them where you want them to be relative to how you shot them. So basically what that means is that if you shot with, in a really kind of dark environment or maybe in a really kind of bright outdoor setting, you know that some of your highlights might be too high, your shadows might be too low, and you want to set those within a certain range, right? There's only so much information that you can display on the screen. There's only so much brightness or darkness that you can display without basically wasting all that information. And so what you do is you bring your highlights and your lowlights within where you need them to be so that they're not above or below what's going to be displayed on the screen of the folks who are going to be watching your video. Same thing for still photos, right? If you're going to be printing them or if you're going to be editing them for display on the web, you want to make sure that everything is pleasing to the eye. The other thing that color correction allows you to do is set your midtones where they need to be. This gives you the kind of contrast that you might want and really kind of sets the mood for your image. But generally, you're just looking to make sure that you don't have anything out of place. That everything looks good, that everything falls within 0 to 100. 0 being the darkest, 100 being the brightest, so that you don't have anything outside of that range. And that you don't also have everything kind of smashed in the middle, right? So if you have your midtones, your highlights, and your shadows all on top of each other, it's going to look super flat and gray and boring. You want your shadows to be dark, and you want your brights to be bright, and you want your midtones to be where you need them to be. One of the other things that you'll work on when you're doing color correction is making sure that you're setting your white points properly, or your white balance, so that your color is right. So that white is white and that you've got the right amount of tone in your image. So those are the basics of color correction. That's the first thing that you're going to do when you are adjusting or manipulating your video before you get to some of the more complicated stuff related to color. That's correcting for the color that you took in the camera. That's making sure that it's going to be quality for your edit and quality for your color grade. Right? Color grade is the next step. Before we get to color grade though, I want to talk about something specific, which is log shooting or shooting in log. I talked about it in my last video. I didn't really go into the details of it, but here's the basics of log. Normally your brights are bright and your shadows are dark and your midtones are somewhere in the middle, right? Well, if you shoot flat, then you're not going to have to worry about blowing out your highlights or crushing or killing your blacks. You'll get detail in the blacks and the shadows and the highlights, and your midtones will be right about here. This type of video is super, super ugly to look at. No one wants to watch this on your screen. There's no contrast. There's very little saturation. The color isn't great, but what you end up with is as much detail as possible in the highlights and as much detail as possible in the shadows. So why is this important? When you're shooting with the Mavic Pro, the iPhone, any or most DSLR cameras, you're shooting directly to a compressed format. So what that means is that the color information that's coming out of the sensor and into the image signal processor of your camera or your drone or your phone is getting manipulated by that processor, all that information, and then it's being compressed and stored directly into whatever movie file or format that it's using. So once that's done, that is locked in. So if you're applying like a style, which is what they call it on the Canon cameras, or on the Mavic, or you're letting Apple on the iPhone manipulate how the colors are working, all of that gets locked into and just baked into the finished file. There's really not a whole lot of manipulation of that later. So if you wanted to create a style that was more your own and you wanted to do that in post-production, you're gonna have to put that over top of whatever was baked into the video when you did it. With log, it does none of that. There's no contrast applied, there's no color manipulation applied. You get a super flat image. Now the purpose of this is so that when you import this video onto your computer or onto your iPad and you're doing any sort of color manipulation on it later, you've got the most amount of detail and information possible. Because if, for example, your Canon camera is shooting in a high contrast style, you're probably going to lose a lot of the detail in your blacks, right? A lot of the information is going to go super dark because it's adding all that contrast. Your midtones are going to be low and the black detail is just going to disappear. And there's no getting that back. It's gone. If you shoot in flat log format, you'll probably be able to get that back and be able to manipulate that however you want. If at the end of the day, that's how you want it to look, you want those blacks just to be solid black and just gone, well, that's fine. But the question is, do you want to do that in the camera or do you want to do that afterwards where you have a little bit more control? If you're looking for speed, doing it in the camera is the best way to do it because then you're done, right? You pull that video out, you edit it, you export it, and you're finished. But if you do want to have a little bit more control over the creative process, which will be important when we talk about color grading, you want to shoot in a flat format. Now, there's a couple of different versions of log, and this will be important when we talk about LUTs. But log format basically just means that instead of having that angled highlights to shadows, it's just flat. It's as flat as possible. And log gives you the opportunity to, like I said, keep as much information in those different areas as possible. That way, when you're in your video editor or you're manipulating your footage, you can add in the color and the contrast and the tone that you want, not the one that was chosen by your camera or by your iPhone or by your drone. Now, there's a really simple way around this, right? If you've shot a lot of still footage and you shoot in RAW, you know that it doesn't matter how you shoot or if you use any sort of picture style, because the raw image is literally the raw luminance and chrominance data, the light and color data, straight off of the sensor, recorded directly into one file. So then you can take that and you have a ton of range and flexibility with that file when you're done, when you go into post-production. That works really well with a still photo. But in order to do that with video, each frame of that video has to be raw. It's not compressed really at all. There are huge advantages to this. You get an amazing amount of detail. There's no compression whatsoever, and you're able to really kind of manipulate that in a considerable way. The problem is that the amount of processing power necessary, both on the camera and in the post-production rig necessary to make that work, can be pretty costly. So the more expensive or the more powerful your camera or your computer is, the more capable you will be at editing raw video. But right now it's still pretty difficult, and honestly I find that for the types of things that I'm shooting, shooting in log and then editing afterwards, even in a compressed format, is still just fine. So how do you shoot in log? There's a couple of ways to do it. It depends on the device that you're on. If you're on a Canon DSLR, that is not the 1DX or a Canon 5D Mark IV that's been sent in for that C-Log upgrade, which is available for I think about $100, or you can buy it actually baked in now, I think, to the Mark IV. If you have the Canon that I have, the Canon 6D Mark II, or any of the non-5D series cameras, you can get a couple of different things that will help you do it. The first thing is you can just go into your style settings and just set it super flat, right? Remove all the additional sharpness, remove the saturation, remove the contrast, and that will cause you to have a really flat image. And that actually works pretty well. That's boom, that's easy. You can also go get the CineStyle color profile. It's made by Technicolor, and it's available for free as a download. There's also another one out there I think it costs about 10 bucks. It's called EOS, or the EOS log. And it is very close to the C log that comes with Canon C series cameras and the 5D Mark IV and the 1DX, I believe. I've never worked with it, so I don't know. If you've worked with it, go ahead and put something in the comments. I use the Technicolor CineStyle color profile, especially when I'm shooting B-roll footage. It works really great. You can add a lot of cinematic color to that afterwards, and it really holds up well. Right now, I'm shooting in the portrait style mode because I don't want to have to color correct or play with this later. I think it looks fine. I can see it in the screen. I think it looks okay. So depending on what your outcome is, what your end result is going to be, whether you're just shooting a vlog or whether you're doing something for a client or you're doing something a little more cinematic, using the C log or the log format is going to be a little bit better. So that's on the Canon DSLRs. So on the Mavic Pro, I use the built-in D-Log style, which is really great. It's not available on the Spark. The Spark doesn't really have a whole lot of color correction options. It is available on the Mavic Pro. I'm sure it's available on the Phantom. The Mavic Air, the new drone that DJI just announced and released, from what I understand, does not have D-Log. It does have the D-Cinelike. The Cinelike style, which I've not shot with. So maybe I'll do another video later on to compare those two, but it does not have the D-Log that I'm aware of. If you have a Mavic Air and you're using the D-Log format because it's there, shoot me a message because I've not seen that anywhere. That would be very interesting. Okay, so that's log, right? That's why you want to shoot in log. Gives you lots of flexibility for doing color grading. So what is a color grade? A color grade is where you basically take your footage once it's been color corrected and you add the kind of style or tone that you want for your footage. So in some cases you might, and you want something that's high contrast, a low saturation, you know, kind of a Saving Private Ryan look. That's pretty cool. Or maybe you just want something that's kind of summery and fun. You're going to go with that orange and teal for shadows and highlights. You know, whatever it might be. Maybe you shot outside and it was super white, super blue, and you want to make it kind of old-timey looking, so you want to push more of those yellows and oranges for your highlights and just kind of change your white color, your white balance on that shot. That's where color grading comes in. So there are lots of different ways that you can do this. I've shown a bunch of them. You can use Final Cut Pro. It's got the built-in color board. Adobe Premiere has the built-in Lumetri color system, which is phenomenal. And the LumaFusion app that I've been using on the iPad has its color corrections as well. So once you've got your color corrected and graded the way you want, you know, that's when you can really kind of set your tone. You can add in your own contrast and you can kind of figure out how you want it to be. So what is a LUT? A LUT is a lookup table. And basically what that means is, and this gets into the different kinds of LUTs, a LUT is designed to help you convert one thing to another using a mathematical calculation or a comparison between one figure and another. It's a lookup table. You look it up in one and it compares it to another. This is important in a couple of the different ways that LUTs are used. The first kind of LUT is a camera LUT. A camera LUT allows you to compare or adjust color or kind of output from one camera and another. So let's say that you're shooting on location and you have the Canon C100 shooting in C-Log, but you're using maybe a Red or you know, a Panasonic or something else, and you're shooting in S-Log or in D-Log, and you want those things to match. What you can do is you can use a LUT to get those to be as close as possible so that when you go to color correct and add your color grade, those are as close to each other as possible. You don't want to have to grade all the different shots from one camera to another. This kind of gives you a level playing field when possible. There's still some adjustments you might need to make, but it gets it pretty close, which is nice. The next kind of LUT is a color space LUT. So there are different color spaces that are used in different cameras. So some cameras are shooting with Adobe RGB, some are shooting with Rec 709. There's a handful of different color spaces. And color spaces just means how much color is contained in the image, right? And some are smaller than others. And sometimes if you're shooting with multiple cameras and you want the color space to be the same, you need to kind of convert it. And the LUT allows you to do that, which is nice. The third and final style or type of LUT is the one that you're probably going to use most often, and that is a creative LUT or a style LUT. What a style LUT does is the same as like a preset in Lightroom. It will apply a specific effect. The things that we've been talking about before, contrast, saturation, sharpness, your white point, adjusting your white balance, those types of things are controlled by a LUT. So if there's a specific look that you want, and maybe you like using it, and you want to use it in multiple videos, or maybe there's a look that other people are using and you want to use it in your video, you can get a LUT that will do that. So where do you get LUTs, right? A LUT it comes in a couple of different file formats. The most common is the .cube or .cube file. And .cube files are normally available or compatible with most applications that use LUTs. And they all load a little bit differently. With Adobe, you're going to use Lumitre Color, and you're going to load that LUT. With Final Cut Pro, it doesn't directly support LUTs. You actually need to use a third-party plugin. There's two that are very popular. I'll put links to this in the description. One is called LUT Buddy, and the other one is called MLUTs. I use MLUTs. It works relatively well. Although you have to use their installer, which is a little funky, so I apologize. I'm going to put that link in there. Just know that you do have to install their little application and run it before you can get it in there. With LumaFusion, you can just load it straight in on the iPad. It works perfectly well, and there's no issues. You just add it and you're done. For most LUTs, they come, depending on where they come from, they come like full on. So you'll find yourself backing off the LUT quite a bit. This is like adding an adjustment layer and reducing the strength or the opacity of it because you really you don't want it to push that hard. But you've got that option from 0 to 60 basically on that LUT. There are a lot of places to get free LUTs. Lots of places to download them from, lots of trials that you can get that'll, you give somebody your email address, they want to send you their newsletter, and they'll let you access to your free LUT. I get LUTs from all over. Now, I've got a couple of LUTs that I really, really like. A couple of them came from Ground Control. I'll link those. They have two really cool LUTs. One is for the Technicolor Cine-like that I use, or CineStyle that I use on the Canon camera. You can drop that on and reduce it just a little bit, and it just looks amazing right out of the box. The other one that they have is a D-Log Rec 709 LUT that works really well using D-Log on the Mavic Pro. It's very nice. I would not recommend it at full strength, but I normally bring that down to about 60% and it looks really good. So if you're looking to color correct and then grade your footage out of the Mavic Pro and you want it to look really nice and cinematic, that is a quick and easy way to do that. And that'll work in Final Cut, that'll work in Premiere, that'll work in LumaFusion on the iPad. It doesn't really matter. You can just apply that, bring the blend down just a little bit, and it works perfectly fine. I also purchased LUTs from Peter McKinnon and from Maddie over at Travel Fields. They had some really great LUTs. They were on sale around the winter time for Christmas. I bought those. They work really great. I keep them in my library and they're awesome. There's a couple of different ways that I use those. I haven't used them all, but they're just really fun. Peter and Maddie also have some Lightroom presets that are really cool. I'll link to those. They've got a site where you can buy those and they're really nice. I haven't made any LUTs myself. If anybody's interested in buying LUTs from me, let me know. I'd probably give them away for free, but But let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in, because I'd kind of be interested in making LUTs. I think that might be kind of fun. I've made presets for Lightroom, and that was cool, and I had a good time with it. But so I've purchased these LUTs, I've downloaded these LUTs, and I have these files. So then you ask yourself, okay, where do you keep them? So I use Dropbox to actually store all of my LUTs. And the reason that I use Dropbox is twofold. Number one, it means I can take it all over and keep it organized. But number two, it links into LumaFusion really, really easily. So if I add a new LUT, or I just want to access one on the go, I can use my iPad to edit that footage and add in that additional, color correction and color grade that I want. And I can do that really quickly using the file in Dropbox. You link straight to Dropbox using LumaFusion and you get right to it. So I've talked a lot about color grading, and I've talked about color correction, and I've talked about LUTs. So let's actually hop into Final Cut Pro. We'll take a look at applying a LUT using MLUT and how to modify the blend mode. And then we'll do the exact same thing using the exact same clip with the exact same LUT, but we'll do it on the iPad using LumaFusion. So let's hop into Final Cut first. Okay, so here we are in Final Cut Pro, and what I've got here is a clip that I shot using the Mavic Pro, and what I'm doing is I'm flying over some trees here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this footage. I actually kind of want to use a slightly different clip. I want to start right about here. Yeah, this is a super cool shot, just flying over the ridge here. So I've got that there, and now I'm gonna set my out point right there, and then I'm gonna go ahead and delete this clip, and I'm gonna go ahead and drop this onto my timeline. So now we've got all that there. Okay, so now I've got my clip. This is 4K, 30 frames a second out of the Mavic Pro, and it was shot using D-Log. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this MLUT plugin, and I'll put a link, like I said, I'll put a link in the description as to how to get MLUT. All MLUT is it's a plugin that lets you put LUTs on your videos in Final Cut Pro, because Final Cut does not allow you to directly drop LUTs into the color board. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to actually color correct this footage. So I'm going to go ahead and click here, and I'm going to go to the color board. Okay. Now we've got our exposure up. Now in order to color correct this properly, we really kind of need to see how things are looking. So I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to turn on the scopes. Okay, so I've got this scope turned on, and what you can see here, and I was talking about this before, is that our shadows come down to, I don't know, probably about, what is that, the 20 line, the 15 line? They're nowhere near the bottom. Normally your shadows, your actual blacks, are going to be at 0 in terms of their luminance value, 0 being black and 100 being the brightest white. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take our blacks and we're going to bring them down a little bit. I don't want to bring them all the way to the bottom, but we want to bring them as close as we can without really kind of losing any of that detail. And this adds in a little bit of that additional contrast. And then I'm going to bring our highlights up just a little bit. And then I'm going to bring the midtones down. Actually, you know what? I'm going to bring them up. And then bring those shadows down just a little bit more. Okay, so now that's just a really, really fast color correction. There's a lot more that you could do here, but I just wanted to show you that I've done it. And so now we've got our video basically color corrected. And what we're going to do now is on this shot here, we're going to go and turn off our scopes. And we're going to go ahead and add this MLUT plugin. Now, if we go back to our controls for this particular clip, we have our MLUT control panel here. And as you can see here, it says no LUT selected. So I'm going to go ahead and hit MLUT library. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring up my library of LUTs. So these are the 5 that it came with, but I actually want to switch over to some ones that I got from ground control. And I'm going to go ahead and add in that ground control. I mentioned this earlier. This is the ground control D-Log LUT that's specifically for the D-Log color profile that comes on the Mavic Pro. You can see that this LUT is pretty intense.
it's really kind of crushed this image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit OK, because this is the LUT that I want to use, but I don't want to use it at 100%. I'm actually going to drop it down to about 50 just to start with. And now that looks a little bit better. And then I've got some other controls that I can use here if I needed to. Okay. So that really kind of gives me the ability to control that. And I can also, I can go back and say, oh, never mind, I don't want to use that LUT. Maybe I don't want to use the ground control LUT. I want to use something from Peter McKinnon. So I'm going to click on Peter here. And I want to use his Kodak Killer LUT. Okay, and now I want to hit OK. And then now this one, I might want to bring up the blend, right? I want to make it more intense. So it kind of gives it that old-timey film look. I could even throw some grain in here. There's a lot that you could do. So that's adding a basic LUT using Final Cut Pro using MLUT. Okay. Now I mentioned that I use Dropbox to store my LUTs. So if I go into my MLUT library here, if I wanted to import a new LUT, I'd hit import. And it's going straight to my Dropbox, but you can see here's where I'm storing all of my LUTs. So they're all right there. And I'll put links to all these LUTs and where I got them from.
Okay, so that's how you do it using Final Cut Pro. Now I'm actually going to switch over to the iPad and we're going to take a look at it using the iPad on LumaFusion.
Okay, so here we are on the iPad, and before we got into the actual editing and the application, I just wanted to show you again really quick. I have all of my LUTs stored in Dropbox, which means that they're stored locally on my iPad, but they're also stored in the cloud, so I can access them at multiple locations. So in this case, I've got some specific folders for each of the different types of LUTs that I have. So remember I mentioned that I had some LUTs from Peter McKinnon, so here are those here. And then I've got some from Maddie over at Travel Feels. He's actually got 2 different packs. And here's something interesting. Pack 2, he actually set up for non-log and also for log. So these different LUTs actually take into account whether or not you're shooting with log or not. So if you don't have a camera that will allow you to control whether or not you're shooting in log, those are some great LUTs. And again, I'll put links to the LUTs from Maddie and Peter on and a couple of these other ones in the description of this video. So in that case, the one that I was using was actually one of the ground control LUTs. This ground control LUT. Now you can actually open this thing and you can look at it. This is really all it is. It's just a bunch of numbers. It's a lookup table. That's all it does. It compares numbers. So it allows you to modify the existing color values with these kind of calculations. So these are pretty cool. Okay, so let's hop into LumaFusion. Okay, so now I've got LumaFusion open and I've got our clip. This is the same clip that we were using in Final Cut Pro, just of the drone flying over that, that mountain face. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and select it here. We've got our clip. I'm going to go ahead and hit this toolbox over on the right hand side. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Edit. And this is going to bring me into the edit screen. And remember, we've got frame and fit, we've got speed and reverse, and we've got color and effects. So I want to use color and effects. And I'm going to go ahead and use the original effects template before I get into it. Okay. And so I want to do just a minor amount of correction here. There isn't a way to do any sort of monitor. So there's no waveform monitor here, so I can't really see exactly what I'm doing, but I'm going to guess here. So I know that we brought our highlights up a little bit and brought our midtones also up while keeping our highlights a little lower. Okay, so that looks pretty close if we kind of scrub through it. in terms of where we were on Final Cut. Okay, so now a lot of people asked, how do I apply a LUT to this? Okay, so on the right hand side here, you see this little, looks like a door with an arrow in it. Okay, it's right here. When you click on that, it's going to ask you to import presets and LUTs. Now, I've already linked this to my Dropbox, but if I just go ahead and go back to sources, you can see that you can pick from iCloud Drive, you can pick from a network that you have at home, your Dropbox, a Box account, Google Drive, OneDrive, or an iTunes share folder. In my case, I'm using my Dropbox. It's automatically logged into my Dropbox account. You can see down there in the bottom corner, right? Asks me if I want to sign out. If I wasn't signed in, it would ask me to sign in. And I'm going to click on LUTs. So now there are all the folders that I showed you, right, from here. So those folders here are the same folders that you see here. So in this case, I'm going to go to ground control, and I'm going to select the ground control D-log to 709 LUT. Now, once you've selected it, you've got to hit the little button again to import it. And it's going to download the actual LUT itself and apply it to the clip. So there you go. So now LumaFusion calls it blend versus intensity. Basically, it's the opposite of how Final Cut does it. So a 0 blend means 100% intensity. So I'm actually going to bring this down to about 70, which is really 30, if that makes sense. And then we can still kind of scroll through this and we can see how that LUT has been applied. We can try other LUTs too. If we don't like this one, I can trash this LUT and I can add another one. Let's say that I don't want to add one of those. I want to go back to LUTs, and maybe I want to add that one from Peter, that Kodak killer one. And I want to import that there. And now it's applied that LUT. Now I like that blend. That actually looks pretty good. But if you wanted to back it off, you could and reduce it, but I kind of like it at 100%. This looks like it's giving a little bit of a blue or teal hue to the shadows, a little bit of an orange hue to the highlights, and it's adding kind of a bit of a lower saturation on the shadows. And I think that that looks pretty cool. Then you can go back to your timeline. And now you've got it right here. So now let's say that there's another video that we want to add, or another clip, right? So if we go back a little bit in our clip, let's say there's a piece here that we want to add. Just throw that in there. And we'll add that to the end of our clip here. But now, as you can see, it's in log. So now we can go in here and we can edit this. And we'll go to color and effects. Okay, and then we can just go ahead and add our Kodak killer and go back to our timeline. And now you can see they have that same look. So I think that looks pretty good, and I'm going to go ahead and export.
Okay, so you can see that process isn't too complicated. You can add the LUT after you've adjusted your clip, and then you can just export and you get that quality look. And then, like I said, using Dropbox, I'm able to connect to all of my different LUTs together, and I don't have any issues keeping them all organized, which is really, really nice. So that's how I use LUTs. That's how I color grade. It's why I shoot in log whenever possible, or at least the flattest profile possible. Do I always shoot in log? No. Right now, I'm not shooting in log. Why? Because honestly, I don't want to color grade this later. I know what it's going to look like. I think it looks fine. I don't think you really mind all that much. This is not a cinematic shot. This is just me talking into the camera. The most important thing for this shot is that the audio sounds good. So I hope the audio sounds good. But there are other shots that I might do where I really would want to have a more cinematic look, or I might want to apply a very specific tone. And to do that, I'm going to make sure that I'm shooting in log or as flat a profile as possible. And then I'm going to make sure that I color correct my footage. And then I'm going to add the style or LUT that I want to use to get that style that I'm looking for, to get that feeling, that tone that I'm looking for in my image. It really helps when I'm switching back and forth between footage from the Canon and footage from the Mavic. That way I can keep colors similar and the tone feels the same. It's not jarring to switch from one to the next. It actually feels like you're watching the same video just from a different perspective, which is really nice. So I hope that this video answered a lot of your questions. If you have more, ask them. I'm happy to continue to answer these questions. I'm happy to continue talking about color grading and editing and all this fun stuff. This is really fun for me. So let me know. Go ahead and like this video if it's something that you're interested in. Go ahead and put a comment if there's something else that you'd like me to cover. Go ahead and share this with your friends. And if you're not already, please subscribe to this channel. I've had a ton of subscriptions in the last couple of days, which has been great, which means people like the stuff that I'm doing. So I'm going to keep doing it just like this. Like I said, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It helps me know that you're interested in this kind of thing. And I'll see you in the next video.